June 12, 2012. A hospital room in Los Angeles. The fluorescent lights hum, the monitors beep, and Henry Hill, the man whose life became the greatest mob movie ever made, is dying. He's 69 years old, half Irish, half Sicilian. A kid from Brownsville, Brooklyn, who started running errands for the Lucchese crime family at 11. A hijacker, a drug dealer, a conspirator in the biggest cash robbery in American history. And then, the thing that kept him alive longer than any of them, a rat. His testimony sent 50 people to prison. His story became a book, then a film that grossed $46 million and changed the way America understood organized crime. Goodfellas, directed by Martin Scorsese, released in 1990, based almost entirely on the real life of the man now lying in this bed. But here's what most people don't know. Goodfellas didn't just tell Henry Hill's story. It depicted more than 24 real people, killers, thieves, informants, wives, and victims, nearly all of whom met violent or tragic ends. And the movie only scratched the surface. Jimmy Burke, the mastermind who murdered almost everyone who ever worked with him. Tommy DeSimone, the psychopath whose body has never been found. Karen Hill, the mob wife who made the one choice none of them ever could. And the Lufthansa crew. These 10 people systematically executed in 6 months to protect a single secret. This is what really happened to every real person in Goodfellas. To understand the world these people lived in, you have to understand Paul Vario's crew. Vario was a capo regime, a captain in the Lucchese crime family, one of New York's 5 Mafia dynasties. His territory was Southeast Queens, and his crown jewel was John F. Kennedy International Airport. His men called it Citibank. Hundreds of millions of dollars in cargo flowed through JFK every year, and Vario's crew controlled who touched it, who moved it, and who stole it. The operation ran out of a dingy bar called Robert's Lounge in South Ozone Park, Queens. It was owned by Jimmy Burke, Vario's most valuable earner, and a man who specialized in truck hijacking with a level of professionalism that earned him the nickname Jimmy the Gent. Burke would stuff a $50 bill into each truck driver's wallet before stealing the load, a gesture that kept the tips flowing and the complaints minimal. What made Vario's crew unusual was its composition. Traditional mafia families were exclusively Italian. Vario's operation was a criminal melting pot. Italians, Irish, black, a Jewish, anyone who could earn. Henry Hill was half Irish, half Sicilian. Burke was Irish-American. Stax Edwards was black. Martin Krugman was Jewish. None of them could ever be formally inducted into the Mafia, but under Vario's protection, they operated in its shadow, earning millions through hijacking, loan sharking, gambling, extortion, and eventually, narcotics. The arrangement worked because Vario got a cut of everything. Every stolen truck, every loan shark payment, at every gambling operation, a percentage went up to Paulie. And Paulie kicked a percentage up to the Lucchese boss. The system was simple, reliable, and, for nearly 2 decades, almost untouchable. In 1980, after Hill was arrested on drug charges and facing death at Burke's hands, he agreed to cooperate with the FBI. Over the next several years, journalist Nicholas Pileggi conducted hundreds of hours of interviews with Hill, resulting in the 1985 book Wise Guy. Martin Scorsese read a pre-publication excerpt in New York Magazine and called Pileggi within days. Together, they wrote 12 drafts of the screenplay. For legal reasons, they changed the names. James Burke became Jimmy Conway. Paul Vario became Paulie Cicero. Thomas DeSimone became Tommy DeVito. But the events, the hijackings, the murders, the Lufthansa heist, the drugs, the betrayal, were drawn directly from Hill's accounts. B. Hill himself called the finished film 95% accurate. He was paid $480,000 for the rights. What the film captured brilliantly was the texture and rhythm of daily mob life. the VIP treatment at the Copacabana, the prison cooking scenes where Vario really did slice garlic with a razor blade, the escalating paranoia of Hill's drug-fueled final act. Edward McDonald, the federal prosecutor who handled Hill's cooperation, played himself in the film. Oh, but the movie had to compress, omit, and occasionally soften. And the reality, particularly what happened after the Lufthansa heist, was far worse than anything Scorsese put on screen. December 11th, 1978, 3:12 in the morning. JFK Airport, Lufthansa Cargo Terminal. 6 masked gunmen, Thomas DeSimone, Angelo Seppi, Louis Cafora, Robert McMahon, Joseph Manri, and a Sicilian named Paolo Licastri, entered the building and took every employee hostage at gunpoint. In 64 minutes, without firing a single shot, they loaded $5,875,000 in cash and jewelry into a Ford Econoline van. It was the largest cash robbery in American history. The heist had been months in the making. The tip originated with Louis Werner, a Lufthansa cargo agent drowning in gambling debts. Werner told bookmaker Martin Krugman about the cash shipment. Krugman told Hill. Hill told Burke. Burke got Vario's approval from Florida. And Burke assembled the crew. The plan worked perfectly. The aftermath was a massacre. Within weeks of the biggest cash robbery in American history, the bodies started turning up. Not because the heist went wrong. It didn't, because the man who planned it decided that dead men can't testify. And Jimmy Burke had never been sentimental about killing. The first to die was Parnell Stacks Edwards. Samuel L. Jackson played him in the film. Edwards had one job after the heist: ditch the van. Instead, he parked it at a fire hydrant near his girlfriend's apartment, got high, and fell asleep. Police found the van within 2 days, complete with his fingerprints. On December 18, 1978, exactly 1 week after the robbery, Tommy DeSimone and Angelo Seppi entered a Queens apartment and shot Edwards 5 times in the head with a .25 caliber revolver. He was 31 years old. The first domino. Martin Krugman was next. The bookmaker who'd started the whole thing by passing along the Lufthansa tip. After the heist, Krugman made the fatal mistake of demanding his share, loudly, persistently, to anyone who would listen. Burke couldn't tolerate the noise. On January 6, 1979, Krugman walked into a mob-controlled bar on Rockaway Boulevard and never walked out. Hill later told investigators that Burke and Angelo Seppi killed and dismembered him there. His body was never found. His wife, Fran, collected $135,000 in life insurance after he was declared legally dead in 1986. Then came Richard Eaton. His death inspired one of the most iconic images in the film, the frozen body hanging in the meat truck, the scene attributed to the character Frankie Carbone. In reality, Eaton was a con man who held the liquor license for Robert's Lounge. D. Burke had entrusted him with $250,000 of heist proceeds to launder in Florida. Eaton swindled it. In February 1979, his frozen, bound, and gagged body was discovered in an abandoned refrigerated truck in Brooklyn. The corpse was so frozen, it took 2 days to thaw. Burke's conviction for Eaton's murder, the only Lufthansa-related homicide that ever resulted in a conviction, came in 1985. But Burke was just getting started. Teresa Ferrara, Tommy DeSimone's mistress and a secret FBI informant, vanished on February 10th after telling her 19-year-old niece she had a chance to make $10,000 and would be back in 15 minutes. 3 months later, a dismembered female torso washed ashore in Barnegat Inlet, New Jersey. Breast augmentation records confirmed the identity. Her head and limbs were never recovered. Louis and Joanna Cafora, Johnny Roastbeef in the film, disappeared around March of '79. Cafora had been one of the 6 gunmen inside the Lufthansa terminal. His crime? He bought his wife a custom pink Cadillac and drove it near JFK, where the FBI was crawling over every lead. Hill claimed they were killed together and compacted with the pink Cadillac at an auto wrecking yard. Their bodies were never found, while Robert Frenchie McMahon and Joseph Joe Buddha Monry, two more of the 6 gunmen, were found on May 16th, slumped in the front seat of a Buick on Schenectady Avenue in Brooklyn. 1 shot each to the back of the head, .44 caliber, clinical, professional. And Paolo Licastri, the Sicilian placed on the crew as the Gambino family's representative, turned up on June 13th, bullet-riddled, shirtless, burning on a trash heap in Flatlands, Brooklyn. I so badly burned that forensic scientists couldn't initially determine age, race, or sex. Identified weeks later by dental records. At least 10 people connected to the Lufthansa heist were murdered or vanished within 6 months of the robbery. Burke orchestrated nearly all of it, and 1 more would follow years later. Angelo Seppi, the triggerman who'd helped Burke carry out several of these murders, was himself shot 3 times in the head on July 18, 1984, in a Brooklyn apartment. His girlfriend Joanna Lombardo was killed alongside him. Even Burke's executioners weren't safe from Burke. And here's the thing that should keep you up at night. Burke was never charged for any of it. Not for Krugman, not for the Kaforas, not for McMahon and Monry, not for Licastri, not for Sepe, not for any of the Lufthansa murders except Richard Eaton. But Burke had miscalculated on one thing. He assumed Henry Hill would be too afraid to talk. By 1980, Hill was drowning in cocaine, dealing it against Vario's explicit orders, using it himself, spiraling out of control. When he was arrested on narcotics charges, he looked at the math. A long prison sentence on one side, a bullet from Jimmy Burke on the other. Burke was killing everyone even remotely connected to the heist, and Hill knew his name was on that list. So Henry Hill did what none of them ever expected. He called the FBI, and he told them everything. His testimony resulted in 50 convictions, including both Paul Vario and Jimmy Burke. The world of the Goodfellas, built on hijacking, murder, and the biggest cash robbery in American history, collapsed in a single act of self-preservation. If you were in Hill's position, facing prison or a bullet from Jimmy Burke, would you have flipped? Tell me in the comments. Hill's testimony brought down the crew. But the story of what happened to each of these people, the ones who survived and the ones who didn't, goes far beyond what any courtroom could capture. And it starts with the man who started all of it. Henry Hill entered the United States Marshals' Witness Protection Program in 1980 with his wife Karen and their 2 children, a son named Greg and a daughter named Gina. The family was relocated repeatedly: Seattle, Cincinnati, Omaha, Butte, Montana, Independence, Kentucky. Each time, new names, new identities, new rules, no contact with the old life. But Hill couldn't do it. He couldn't stop being Henry Hill. He drank, he used drugs, he got arrested again and again for narcotics, for assault, for disorderly conduct. Worst of all, he kept telling people who he really was. The U.S. Marshals warned him, then they warned him again. In 1987, after 7 years of violations, they expelled him from the program entirely. He was on his own. Hill drifted to the West Coast, where he moved in with a girlfriend named Lisa Caserta. The arrests kept coming: meth possession, drug paraphernalia, drunk driving, assault. Between 1987 and 2008, he was arrested or cited more than a dozen times across multiple states. The U.S. Marshals had given up on protecting him, and local law enforcement had learned who he was. Yet he was a walking headline: Goodfellas informant arrested again, and he seemed incapable of stopping. But somewhere in the chaos, Hill discovered something unexpected. Celebrity. The man who'd ratted out the Lucchese crime family reinvented himself as America's most famous gangster-turned-entertainer. He became a regular on the Howard Stern show, where his rambling, often incoherent appearances became a kind of recurring segment. He appeared on cable news programs, mob documentaries, and reality TV shows. He authored multiple books, including The Wise Guy Cookbook. He launched a pasta sauce brand called Sunday Gravy. He started a website selling mob memorabilia, and he took up painting, watercolors of mob scenes that were surprisingly competent, now collector's items selling for thousands of dollars at auction. He even did paid appearances at restaurants and bars where people would buy him drinks and ask about Jimmy and Tommy and Paulie. He filed for divorce from Karen in 1990. It wasn't finalized until 2002. 12 years to unravel a marriage that had been built on lies, money, and violence. In 2011, Hill underwent open-heart surgery. His body was giving out. Decades of cocaine, alcohol, and stress had taken their toll. On June 12, 2012, one day after his 69th birthday, Henry Hill died at a Los Angeles hospital from complications of heart disease. His girlfriend Caserta told the press he went out pretty peacefully for a good fella. The actor who made Hill immortal didn't last much longer in public memory before he too was gone. Ray Liotta died on May 26, 2022 at age 67 in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, while filming a movie called Dangerous Waters. His autopsy revealed atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, hardening of the arteries. In February 2023, Liotta received a posthumous star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Here's the irony of Henry Hill's life. He was the informant, the survivor, the one who outlived Jimmy Burke, Tommy DeSimone, Paul Vario, and nearly every person he'd ever worked with. But he lived the most diminished life of any of them, expelled from witness protection, addicted, repeatedly arrested, painting watercolors of a world that no longer existed. He survived the mob, but he couldn't survive himself. James Burke's life was defined by violence before he ever committed any. Born on July 5, 1931 in New York City, he was abandoned by his mother, believed to have been a prostitute, at age 2. What followed was a childhood of foster homes and orphanages, each one worse than the last. He suffered physical and sexual abuse in nearly every placement. At 13 years old, Nar, his foster father, died in a car crash, reportedly caused when the man turned around to hit Burke in the back seat. Between the ages of 16 and 22, James Burke spent only 86 days outside of institutions. His birth name was James Conway, the exact name Martin Scorsese used in the film. He took Burke from one of his foster families. As an Irish American, he could never be formally inducted into the Italian Mafia, but under Paul Vario's protection, for he operated a semi-independent crew out of Robert's Lounge, his bar in South Ozone Park, Queens. The Lounge was a dump, a low-ceiling tavern with wood paneling and cheap beer, but it was the nerve center of one of the most prolific hijacking operations in New York history. His specialty was truck hijacking, executed with such professionalism that drivers actually tipped him off about valuable future loads in exchange for those $50 bills. A truck carrying electronics from JFK might be worth $50,000. Cigarettes, liquor, designer clothing. Burke moved it all, and he always had buyers lined up before the truck was even stolen. Hill estimated that Burke was responsible for 60 to 70 murders over his career. Think about that number. 60 to 70. And those were just the ones Hill knew about. Burke masterminded the Lufthansa heist, but he was never charged for it. The evidence was circumstantial. The witnesses were dead because Burke had killed them, and the money was never found. Instead, he went down for other crimes. In 1982, he was convicted of conspiracy in the 1978 Boston College basketball point-shaving scandal, a scheme orchestrated by Hill. 12 years. Then, while serving that sentence, he was convicted in 1985 of the murder of Richard Eaton, the con man found frozen in the meat truck. 20 years to life. Burke served his time at Wenda Correctional Facility in Alden, New York. He never cooperated, never named names, never showed remorse. On April 13, 1996, James "Jimmy the Gent" Burke died of lung cancer at Roswell Park Cancer Institute in Buffalo, New York. He was 64 years old. He's buried at St. Charles Cemetery in East Farmingdale, Long Island. But death didn't end the story. In 2013, 17 years after Burke died, the FBI excavated the basement of Burke's former house in Queens and discovered human remains. DNA testing confirmed the bones belonged to Paul Katz, a warehouse owner who had witnessed a Lucchese drug operation. Burke and Bonanno family captain Vincent Asaro had strangled Katz with a dog chain back in 1969 and buried him under the concrete floor. In 2014, Nissa Asaro was indicted for Katz's murder and for his role in the Lufthansa heist, making him the last living person ever charged in connection with the robbery. He was acquitted of all charges in November 2015. Asaro died on October 22, 2023, at age 88, the last living Lufthansa figure. Burke killed nearly everyone to protect one secret. Then, Hill handed that secret to the FBI anyway. And the $5,875,000? He never recovered. Not a single dollar. Thomas DeSimone came from Mafia royalty. His grandfather, Rosario DeSimone, ran the Los Angeles crime family starting in 1922. His uncle Frank succeeded as boss. Tommy grew up around power, violence, and the absolute certainty that he was untouchable. And here's something the movie got completely wrong. Joe Pesci, 5 feet 4 inches, wiry, explosive, won an Academy Award for playing Tommy DeVito. But the real Thomas DeSimone was 6'2", 225 pounds, with what Henry Hill described as the looks of Errol Flynn. A physically imposing, classically handsome man. Hill said Pesci captured the personality, 90 to 99% accurate, but the package was entirely different. What Pesci couldn't fully convey was the scope of DeSimone's violence. Hill called him a pure psychopath, not in the casual way people throw that word around, but in the clinical sense. DeSimone derived genuine pleasure from killing. He murdered random strangers for target practice. He once shot a man outside a bar because the man looked at him wrong. His confirmed kills include William "Billy" Batts Benvena, a Gambino soldier beaten to death in 1970. Michael "Spider" Gianco, a teenage bartender shot dead for talking back during a card game. Parnell "Stacks" Edwards, executed 7 days after the Lufthansa heist. A Gambino associate named Foxy Jerethi, murdered in 1974. And a stranger named Howard Goldstein, shot on the street for no reason anyone could ever determine. Those are just the confirmed ones. Hill believed the actual number was significantly higher. The murders of Billy Batts and Foxy Jerethi are what sealed DeSimone's fate. Both men were connected to the Gambino family. And in the Mafia, killing a made man without commission approval is a death sentence, no exceptions. Paul Vario had shielded DeSimone for years, but by late 1978, the Gambinos demanded justice. Vario had no choice. He revealed DeSimone's crimes to the Gambino leadership and gave them permission to do what they wanted. In late December 1978 or early January 1979, the exact date has never been confirmed, Tommy DeSimone was told he was being taken to his Mafia induction ceremony. The thing he'd wanted his entire life. The moment he'd finally become a made man. Instead, according to Hill, he was murdered, reportedly by John Gotti personally, along with Thomas Agro. Multiple sources say it took a long time. Gotti wanted DeSimone to suffer for killing his friend Billy Batts. In the movie, Tommy is shot in the face, and the narration tells us his mother couldn't give him an open coffin funeral. In reality, there was no coffin, no funeral, no grave. Thomas DeSimone's body has never been found. Yet he was reported missing on January 14th in 1979 and declared legally dead by the FBI in 1990. His remains are believed to lie somewhere in The Hole, a notorious Mafia dumping ground on the Brooklyn-Queens border, but excavations have never confirmed it. He was killed for the same reason he killed others, without permission, without mercy. The mob's law of equivalence applied to one of its own. Paul Vario was the man who held everything together. Born on July 10, 1914, he rose through the Lucchese ranks to become one of the family's most powerful capo regimes. In the film, Paul Sorvino plays him as measured, calm, almost gentle, a quiet patriarch dispensing wisdom from a lawn chair. The real Vario was nothing like that. He stood 6'3", weighed 250 pounds, and had a volcanic temper that terrified everyone around him. There's a story, verified by multiple sources, that Vario once sent 2 carloads of men armed with pipes and baseball bats to beat every waiter at a restaurant because a maitre d' had accidentally spilled wine on his wife's dress. That's the man who ran the crew, not the soft-spoken father figure Sorvino portrayed. Vario approved the Lufthansa heist from Florida. He was never charged for it. He controlled JFK airport operations for decades, skimming hundreds of millions through cargo theft, the no-show jobs, and union corruption. And he trusted Henry Hill more than almost anyone in his orbit, a trust that would destroy him. What the movie left out entirely was that Karen Hill had an affair with Vario while Henry was in prison. It also omitted that DeSimone allegedly attempted to assault Karen, an incident that further complicated the tangled relationships within the crew. Vario eventually discovered Hill's drug dealing, which violated his explicit orders, but by then it was too late. Hill was already talking to the FBI. Based on Hill's testimony, Vario was convicted of fraud in 1984 and extortion at JFK Airport in 1985. He was sent to the Federal Correctional Institution in Fort Worth, Texas. On May 3, 1988, Paul Vario died of respiratory failure in a prison hospital. He was 73 years old. Then the man who had controlled an empire from a cab stand in East New York, who had run JFK Airport like his personal bank, died in a government facility, betrayed by the one man he'd treated like a son. Paul Sorvino, the actor who brought Vario to life on screen, died on July 25, 2022, exactly 2 months after Ray Liotta. 2 men who'd made these characters immortal, gone within 60 days of each other. And then there's Karen. Karen Friedman was born on January 16th, out in 1946, and grew up in the Five Towns area of Long Island, a respectable Jewish girl from a respectable family. She met Henry Hill through Paul Vario Jr. in 1965 and married him after just 4 months of courtship. She was 19 years old. What followed was the life the movie showed: the money, the glamour, the violence, the terror. But Lorraine Bracco's Oscar-nominated performance, as extraordinary as it was, only captured part of the story. The affair with Vario, the alleged assault by DeSimone, the full depth of Karen's entanglement in Henry's criminal enterprise. These were details the film either couldn't or chose not to include. In 1980, Karen entered the witness protection program with Henry and their 2 children, Greg and Gina. They were relocated repeatedly. New cities, new names, new schools for the kids. It was, by all accounts, a miserable existence. Henry couldn't stop drinking, using drugs. That's her getting arrested. He was a walking security breach. Karen had to uproot the children every time Henry blew their cover, which happened with depressing regularity. She later told acquaintances that life in witness protection was worse than life with the mob. At least in the mob, she knew the rules. Karen filed for divorce in 1990. It wasn't finalized until 2002, and then she did something remarkable. Something that, in a story full of big personalities and bigger mistakes, might be the most extraordinary choice anyone made. She disappeared. Not the way the others disappeared, in a Buick on Schenectady Avenue, or in a meat truck in Brooklyn, or on a burning trash heap in Flatlands. Karen disappeared on her own terms. She never gave a single interview, never wrote a book, never appeared on Howard Stern or any podcast or any documentary, never met Lorraine Bracco. She committed fully and completely to the anonymity that Henry could never manage. As of today, Karen Friedman Hill is believed to be alive at approximately 80 years old, living somewhere in the United States under an assumed name. Her location is unknown. Her current identity is unknown. She is, as far as anyone can determine, the only person in this entire story who truly got away. Henry made himself a celebrity. Karen made herself invisible. And in a world where everyone who talked, everyone who killed, and everyone who stayed ended up dead or in prison, her silence may be the most extraordinary ending of all. Two of the most memorable scenes in Goodfellas, the Billy Batts murder and the spider shooting, were based on real events. But the reality was different from what Scorsese showed, and in some ways, worse. William Billy Batts Bentvena was a Gambino family soldier and a friend of John Gotti. Born February 22, 1933, he was released from prison in June of 1970 after serving 8 years for heroin smuggling. At a welcome home gathering, Batts taunted DeSimone about his old job as a shoeshine boy, an insult that, in the film, triggers an immediate explosive beating. But the real murder wasn't spontaneous. It was premeditated over 2 weeks. Burke wanted to take over Batts's loan sharking operations, and DeSimone had a personal grudge. On June 11, 1970, DeSimone pistol-whipped Bentvena at Henry Hill's nightclub while Burke held him down. They threw his body in the trunk of a car, but Batts was still alive. They drove to a spot upstate where he was beaten to death with a shovel and a tire iron. The body was buried at a dog kennel, later exhumed and ultimately destroyed in a mechanical compactor at a New Jersey junkyard. Frank Vincent, the actor who played Batts, died on September 13, 2017, at age 80. And the spider incident is even stranger because it may not have happened at all. According to Hill, Michael Spider Gianco was a teenage runaway and car thief who worked as a bartender at Robert's Lounge. During a card game around 1970, DeSimone shot Gianco in the foot for being too slow with his drink. Weeks later, the kid came back in a full leg cast. DeSimone taunted him again, and this time the kid snapped back, told DeSimone to go fuck himself. Burke laughed, tossed the kid some money, and teased Tommy for going soft. DeSimone pulled a .38 and shot Gianco 3 times in the chest. He was approximately 16 years old. Michael Imperioli played Spider in the film, and Hill said the scene was very accurate. But investigators have raised serious doubts. No birth records for a Michael Gianco have ever been located. His body was never found where Hill said it would be. Nobody in the neighborhood around Robert's Lounge remembers him. Hill maintained the story until his death, but whether Spider was a real person or a composite or a fabrication remains one of the unresolved mysteries of the Goodfellas story. If Spider was real, his death represents something essential about this world. You could die for forgetting a drink. You could die for having courage. You could die for absolutely nothing at all. The film is 35 years old now. The crew is gone. But the Lucchese crime family, the organization that spawned all of this, is still in business. And the Lufthansa heist remains exactly what it was in 1978, one of America's great unsolved robberies. In 2025, a 4K restoration of Goodfellas played in theaters across the country for the 35th anniversary. The audiences were new, but the faces on screen belonged to the dead. Ray Liotta and Paul Sorvino both passed within 2 months of each other in the summer of 2022. Vincent Osiro, the last living person ever indicted in connection with the Lufthansa heist, died in October 2023 at age 88 in Queens. The Lucchese family, meanwhile, continues to operate. In April 2025, 39 members and associates of the New Jersey faction were charged with racketeering, gambling, and money laundering. In November, 14 more followed. New Jersey's Attorney General noted that romanticized versions of organized crime have been the subject of countless movies and television shows, but, he added, the reality isn't romantic or cinematic. $5,875,000 was stolen from that Lufthansa terminal in 1978. Not a single dollar has ever been recovered. Only one low-level inside man was ever convicted. Jimmy Burke killed nearly everyone to keep the secret, and then Henry Hill gave it to the FBI anyway. Karen Hill is believed to be alive at 80 years old, somewhere in America, under a name no one knows. The woman who married a gangster at 19, entered witness protection at 34, and spent the next 4 decades proving something the rest of them never understood. In a world that rewards the loudest voice, sometimes the smartest move is silence.